Hey everybody, it's Pastor Emil coming to you live from our office slash spare bedroom for Sweet Jesus, because ice cream is sweet, but Jesus is sweeter. I hope you've had a chance to get your favorite dessert together and have it ready. I have mine, uh, Double Dunker. If you missed the bonus episode on Monday night, Double Dunker is a Turkey Hill flavor, delicious. We don't have it as often here. It seemed to be like on sale all the time where we lived a few years ago. And Double Dunker is this mocha flavored ice cream with two kinds of cookies mixed in there. There's cookie dough and then sort of like an Oreo swirl in there, that kind of chocolatey cookie crumble in there, and it is delicious. I actually started eating mine. I couldn't sit here and wait much longer, so my bowl's actually almost done, which is good because usually I am talking so much that I don't get a chance to even look at the ice cream until later, and then it kind of turns into soup. Still delicious, but I have to stare at it the whole time. So whatever you've got, if you've got some pie, if you've got some cookies, if you've got some cake or cupcakes, something like that, um, take a moment and join me in enjoying the sweetness of your delectable dessert. This is good. The mocha flavored. I'm not a coffee fan. I don't drink coffee, but holy cow, this is awesome. If you haven't tried it, go to your local grocery store and give it a shot. But as sweet as that is, Jesus is sweeter. And not just Jesus, but some of the wonderful things that we're gonna look at tonight here in chapter 1 of The Reason for God by Timothy Keller. As we take a look at this one, the first objection that he posts in the first chapter of his book, dealing with exclusivity. There can't just be one religion. There can't just be one group of people that have all the right answers. That is just way too arrogant. It's way too intolerant, and all kinds of other things that get thrown around when talking about religion in general, Christianity for sure, in particular. I'm sure you've dealt with that. I'm sure you've heard lots of folks come up with all kinds of things that they'll say that, oh no, you can't just all be right. And I think anybody who believes in any kind of God, any kind of religious set of religious beliefs, as long as they're really sincere in what they believe, that's all that really matters. And there's a whole lot of different versions of this very same kind of objection that we kind of got to get through before, in some cases, before we can even really get to talking about Jesus. And that's the second half of the book. We'll get there. I think it's 7 or 8 chapters, and then we get to the second half with the reasons for faith. Right now, we're in the first section, the leap of doubt. Chapter 1, there can't be just one religion. And if you've had a chance to take a look at the book, you see those first 2 stories, not miniature stories, objections that were raised to the author personally as he went about trying to do ministry in Manhattan. Just people really find religion in some circles now, some circles today, religion is just so offensive to people. Religion is seen as the cause of all the world's problems. He tells a story about how he was actually involved in like an interfaith dialogue, trying to be all peaceable in the way that he was interacting with people of different faiths in his community. And he tells a story about how after all the speakers recognize their irreconcilable differences, but yet we're tolerating one another and caring for one another, respecting one another, there are all these people that got up and were just furious at what they were seeing. In fact, one student stands up and says, in frustration. We will never come to know peace on earth if religious leaders keep on making such exclusive claims. This has really seeped into the mindset today of the modern mindset, modern 21st century Americans, and really something that we have to deal with. If just to defend our own ability to believe what we choose to believe in the Jesus and follow the Christian faith, uh, it's important in that sense alone, but especially if we are going to ever try and win them for Christ. And if you're a seeker or a skeptic and you're out there listening to this, you probably know deeply how offensive religion can be, and all the stories about how much evil has been brought into the world because of religion. And so you're very sensitive to this topic, and that's why it's in this book. And I think there's some really great stuff in here about that. So exclusivity is viewed as the enemy of peace, especially in a society like ours where freedom of religion, freedom of speech, freedom to think and believe and do what we want to with little to no restrictions. And in a place like that, it becomes very important. It's not just now that everyone has the freedom to believe those things, but we can't even contest those things or push back on those things, because that is viewed as the source of the major source of strife in the world. And then religion itself is the primary source of those kinds of exclusive claims, where people are kind of trying to disprove other people and attack others' beliefs, whether well-intentioned or not, whether kind or not. Religion is still the primary source of that, and so religion in general gets that really negative connection. People really have a distaste for it for that very reason. And there's a point that the author makes here pretty early on, Dr. Keller makes pretty early on, about where he tentatively agrees with the idea that religion can be bad news, and he picks up on that again at the end of the chapter. So we'll come back to that in just a few minutes. But there is a sense in which I think we can all agree that to a greater or lesser extent, there is a sense that religion is a source of really bad stuff in the world, because if I believe that God has told me to do something, or that I have God on my side, there's a tendency within humanity to take that to an extreme and say, well, because I have God on my side, I can do whatever I want to shut you up, to shut you down, to silence you. So to deal with this idea that exclusivity is so bad, and in particular religion as the source of that is so bad, there are three areas that Dr. Keller talks about that people have tried to use to address this. And the first one is to just outright outlaw religion. All right, just, hey, you can't be religious. There's no place for religion in our society, our nation, our culture, and so they just go out of their way to just stomp it out, do everything they can to stomp it out. We see this in Soviet Russia, in China, in Nazi Germany, even though there was a religious system, it was controlled to a degree that it was effectively stomping out what the actual faith had been up until that time. But typically, history shows us that stomping out religion doesn't make for less oppression. It actually makes for more oppression. And so there's this sense that, yes, while religion is a tool for oppression in certain times and certain places, the lack of religion doesn't stop that. And so, me personally, what that tells me is that oppression is actually the inclination of the human heart. It's a part of what's wrong with us, that we desire power over other people, and we will use whatever means we can to exercise it. Okay, that's what that tells me. Not that religion is bad, but that people are bad. People are awful. And when you take away any sense of right and wrong from any kind of religion, but especially as a Christian, the Christian faith, when you take away the love, the mercy, the kindness, the nonviolence and pacifism of Jesus Christ, well, then there's no reason for anyone to not oppress people. There's no reason for anyone to be kind to other people, to be kind to their enemies, to love people. So just a really interesting thing to consider. If you're a Christian, keep that in mind as you have conversations with people. But if you're a skeptic, you're a seeker. Wow, something to think about. So outlawing it is typically results in more oppression, and it also kind of assumes that there's this idea that we'll just evolve out of religion, as humanity will just evolve out of religion, that we will outgrow it, that we'll finally get to a point where technology and insight and science and all these things will come together in such a way that we just won't need religion anymore. We'll have figured out the fact that this was just a giant crutch to help us survive, and once we're past that, we won't ever even have to have a discussion about this anymore. But as we saw in the preface and in the introduction, actually, that is not the case. That has not been happening. In fact, it's the world is becoming even more religious, and not just a watered down kind of religion, but a religion that is a fervent faith in some of the historic orthodox doctrines of the Christian church, at least as Christianity has continued to thrive, even as we have gained in so many areas in knowledge and science, technology, all that kind of stuff. So, and actually, when you try to outlaw religion, it really makes the faith even stronger. I think he has a couple of places where he highlights this. I think China. Okay, so when the Chinese communists expelled Western missionaries after World War II, they thought they were killing off Christianity in China. Instead, this move only served to make the leadership of the Chinese church more indigenous and therefore to strengthen it. And I think we can see that in a lot of other parts of the world. Looking back at the early church in the first century, the immense persecution that existed, and then how the Christian faith just blossomed in just a few hundred years, going from, I think I've seen some estimates are about 25,000 Christians to millions and millions, almost half of the Roman Empire. So persecuting them and trying to squash it out didn't do what they thought it would do. So the second approach in trying to deal with this idea that we got to get rid of religion, all these exclusive claims, they're just hurting us as the people of this planet, society just can't handle this. It's not good. The second way they do it is they condemn religion, which is a way of stigmatizing it and labeling it as unenlightened and as ignorant and outrageous. And I think if you are a Christian in 21st century America, you know this is happening everywhere. It's everywhere in our popular culture. It's in TV shows and movie. It's found in the news. It's everywhere. This idea that, well, these silly fools, just talking down to us as Christians and making light of the fact that we believe certain things. This is actually something that's starting to have a fair amount of success, actually. I think a lot of people have struggled with their own faith, and they don't have a lot of the answers to some of these challenges. And so because they hear about this so often, the fact that they have a little bit of doubt and then they don't have the right answers and then they keep hearing it, I feel like there's a sense in which a lot of Christians today, a lot of people maybe that aren't active in any kind of religious Christian community of faith, I think that's something that's had a significant impact, and we see that in the amount of church attendance in most congregations and in just membership in churches as a whole today. There are a few ways that they go about doing this. First is he's got a number of these axioms that people tend to use, and it says all major religions are equally valid and basically teach the same thing. Hold on a second. Let me back up for a second here, because there's a key point in the paragraph above that on page 7. This approach creates an environment in which it is considered unenlightened and outrageous to make exclusive religious claims, even in personal conversations, right? So this is why it's so difficult for us as Christians to share our faith. And this is why, if you're a member of Holy Cross, or if you've had any exposure to the Bless model that we've been using to try and help people to begin to find ways of sharing their faith with people that they love and care about, people where they live, work, and play. This is why we have to be so careful and deliberate about how we go about sharing our faith. Okay, so it does so by stating and restating certain axioms that eventually achieve the status of common sense. Those who deviate from them are stigmatized as foolish or dangerous. Unlike the first strategy of just stomping out religion altogether, this approach to the divisiveness of religion is having some effect. It cannot ultimately succeed, however, because at its heart is a fatal inconsistency, even perhaps a hypocrisy, that will eventually lead to the collapse of this way of thinking. And then what follows are some of the axioms. And the first one I mentioned, that's key, that line, though, about the hypocrisy. We're going to get to that later on in this chapter, but the ideas that have propagated this way of thinking, the mentality that you need to sustain it, it can't sustain itself. So the first axiom: all major religions are equally valid and basically teach the same thing. Well, how do we deal with that? Basically, it says that doctrine is unimportant. So what we believe is unimportant. The details of it are unimportant, and yet it assumes doctrines. What do I have here? Inconsistent with major world religions. So there's a sense in which, as long as you believe that all the religions in the world are basically the same, what you're actually saying is that they all, at their heart, really have certain doctrines, okay, certain beliefs about God and who God is and what God is and what God does and all of those things. And generally we get this kind of spiritual force of love, cosmic love, and only love, and there's nothing else to it, and there's no expectations, and there's nothing that needs to be done. It's just whoever you are, whatever you think, whatever you believe, however you live, God just loves you, and that's it, and there's nothing else to it, except a lot of the major world religions don't have some of those key things. In fact, some of them, God is not even a personal God. Some of them, they don't even actually believe in God, but just a spiritual force kind of in the universe. And so they're assuming some doctrines that are actually inconsistent with most major world religions. So it's kind of tricky. And it's a doctrine in and of itself. It is making it is creating a doctrine in order to say that. How does he say this best here? It insists that doctrine is unimportant, but at the same time assumes doctrinal beliefs about the nature of God that are at loggerheads with those of major faiths. But ironically, the insistence that doctrines do not matter is really a doctrine itself. This is on page 8. It holds a specific view of God which is touted as superior and more enlightened than the beliefs of most major religions. So the proponents of this view do the very thing they forbid in others. That's pretty powerful. I mean, there's a lot more detail on that as we go on, but that's kind of the idea. We're going to see a lot of hypocrisy. If we take a lot of these thoughts to their ultimate conclusion, they have to collapse. They have to collapse in on themselves. Each religion, another axiom, each religion sees part of spiritual truth, but none can see the whole truth. Oh man, I see this. I hear this all the time. I've run into this quite a bit. And there's this idea that he talks about in the book about, the elephant and the blind men, right? And so there's this enormous elephant, and there's 4 or 5 blind men, and they're just sort of feeling their way, trying to figure out God. But the elephant is a metaphor for God, or an illustration, or what have you. I'm not thinking the correct word there, but so one guy goes, "Oh, it's long and flexible. That's what God is like." And another guy, that's the trunk, and another guy has the big floppy ear. And it's like long and flat and thin but movable. All that. That's what God's like. And oh, it's a big, enormous, solid, round thing, cylindrical. Oh, that's what God is, because whichever blind man that is, has one of the legs of the elephant. And another one, holy cow, look how solid and long and broad, and that's what God is like. And then one guy gets the tail, and so they all have this different view of God. But the amazing thing is the wonderful way that he comes at that way of thinking is that the only way that you can look at that and say, see, all these blind men, they don't really see the full picture of who God is. The only way you could say that is if you believe you are not blind. If you believe that you can see and you have some special insight or knowledge. So the arrogance that they're so concerned about, this methodology, this way of thinking, right? The arrogance we're so concerned about is actually the very thing that they're using to create this new system of thinking. That illustration and the taking down of that illustration comes from a guy named Leslie Newbegin, who's one of the greatest missiologists, very formational, influential missiologist, a guy who studies Christian mission. And he actually spent 25 years as a missionary in India. And then he went back to his home country in the UK, and he said, whoa, the Western world just somehow became the most difficult place to share the Christian faith. And that was one of the ideas, this idea of exclusivity. We've really hardened ourselves to having these kinds of conversations. So there's a reference in here to that book. Pick it up if you can. If you have any interest in digging a little bit deeper, hearing from one of the top missiologists in the Christian world. Religious belief is too culturally and historically conditioned to be truth. So this is a way of basically saying that not just that all religions are equally true, but this is a way of actually turning it around a little bit and saying that all religions are equally false. So they're just coming at it from every way possible. All religions are equally false. All spiritual claims are the product of our particular historical and cultural moment, and therefore no one should claim they can know the truth, since no one can judge whether one assertion about spiritual and moral reality is truer than another. This is the top of page 10. But there's a lot of inconsistencies in this way of thinking too. A little bit further on down the page, the sociology of knowledge, namely that people believe what they do largely because they are socially conditioned to do so. That's what we're talking about here, okay? We like to think that we think for ourselves, but it is not that simple. We think like the people we most admire and need. However, if you infer from the social conditionedness of all belief that no belief can be held as universally true for everyone, that itself is a comprehensive claim about everyone that is the product of social conditions. So it cannot be true on its own terms. Relativity relativizes itself. Relativity relativizes itself. That's what this gentleman, Peter Berger, in a book that is being quoted here, that's what he says. We can't have relativism all the way down. Our cultural biases make weighing competing truth claims harder, yes. The social conditionedness of belief is a fact. but it cannot be used to argue that all truth is completely relative, or else the very argument refutes itself, right? So we are socially conditioned with this idea. It's our culture and our society that have led us to this idea. And so it can't be trusted. Berger concludes that we cannot avoid weighing spiritual and religious claims by hiding behind the cliche that there's no way to know the truth. We must still do the hard work of asking which affirmations about God, human nature, and spiritual reality are true and which are false. We will have to base our life on some answer to that question, right? So basically, it feels like in a lot of respects that has made us just lazy. We haven't actually taken the time to consider competing truth claims. We just write them off if we don't like them. And especially if they are religious truth claims, and if they have any sense of exclusivity that it seems to be present in them. There's a really interesting way he puts this. Suppose we concede that if I had been born of Muslim parents in Morocco rather than Christian parents in Michigan, this is him quoting another philosopher, Alvin Plantinga, my beliefs would have been quite different. But the same goes for the pluralist. The pluralist is one who just says, hey, everything is fine, no truth, all truth is equal, all truth is false, all those ideas. If the pluralist had been born in Morocco, he probably wouldn't be a pluralist. Does it follow that his pluralist beliefs are produced in him by an unreliable belief-producing process? You can't say all claims about religions are historically conditioned except the one that I'm making right now. Right? That's just hypocrisy. It's the epitome of hypocrisy, and yet very few people are sharp enough to be able to call people on it. It is arrogant, the next axiom, to insist your religion is right and to convert others to it. Let's see. Well, it's no more arrogant than saying one way to think about these truth claims, right? It's no more arrogant than what they're saying, which is like, you can't have any of these truth claims because there is no truth. I mean, that's just as arrogant, shooting down everyone that believes they have any piece of the truth or any way of understanding the truth. Many say that it is ethnocentric to claim, this is on page 12, to claim that our religion is superior to others. Yet isn't that very statement ethnocentric? Most non-Western cultures have no problem saying that their culture and religion is best. The idea that it is wrong to do so is deeply rooted in Western traditions of self-criticism and individualism. To charge others with the sin of ethnocentrism is really a way of saying our culture's approach to other cultures is superior to yours. We are then doing the very thing we forbid others to do. So again, you see there's a lot of inconsistency. If we really drill down into the thinking that goes behind a lot of these ideas, we see that they suffer from some of the same problems they're accusing others of. And in a lot of respects, they're a lot worse. A lot worse. And he says a little bit further on down here, this objection is itself a religious belief. It assumes God is unknowable, or that God is loving but not wrathful, or that God is an impersonal force rather than a person who speaks in Scripture. All of these are unprovable faith assumptions. In addition, their proponents believe they have a superior way to view things. They believe the world would be a better place if everyone dropped the traditional religious views of God and truth and adopted theirs. And then he tells us a great story. Well, I mean, it's not a great story, a great illustration, where there's this professor at the University of Chicago, and he is hearing from this student about how he went forward at a Billy Graham crusade. And the professor is trying to convert the kid. He's trying to convert him out of Christianity into his ideas of secularism and pluralism. And so the arrogance is on all sides, right? I mean, in some sense, we believe what we believe because we believe it's the best thing. We believe it's the best way to explain what we see in the world and how we go about our daily life. It's our what we believe is the best solution, the best worldview, the best way to see and understand everything. And if you believe that's the best way and it's true, well, then why wouldn't you want to tell that to somebody? But it sort of undercuts this whole idea of the arrogance of thinking that we've got it right and somebody else doesn't. And then the third way of dealing with religion, trying to keep it from being so toxic to society, is to keep religion completely private. And basically what this whole section deals with is the idea that this belief that, and it's pretty prevalent. I know I've seen it, and I'm sure you have as well, that you can engage in debate in the public square about all kinds of things, legislation and candidates for office and all those kinds of things, and you can advocate for certain things as long as you don't have a religious reason for doing so. But just like with the other ideas, that idea is really a religious belief in and of itself. He goes into a fair amount of detail here. There's one quote from a guy from Yale that he's got in here. Efforts to craft a public square from which religious conversation is absent, no matter how thoughtfully worked out, will always, in the end, say to those of organized religion that they alone, unlike everyone else, must enter public dialogue only after leaving behind that part of themselves that they may consider the most vital. And that's just not fair in a free society, now is it? But even further, he goes on and says, how can Carter, this author that he's quoting, make such a claim? Let's begin by asking what religion is. Some say it's a form of belief in God, but that would not fit Zen Buddhism, which does not really believe in God at all. Some say it is belief in the supernatural, but that does not fit Hinduism, which does not believe in a supernatural realm beyond the natural world, but only a spiritual reality within the empirical. What is religion then at its essence, right? That's the question. If we can't have religion enter in the public square, we got to define religion. It is a set of beliefs that explain what life is all about, who we are, and the most important things that human beings should spend their time doing. For example, some think that this material world is all there is, that we are here by accident, and when we die, we just rot. And therefore, the important thing is to choose to do what makes you happy and not let others impose their beliefs on you. Notice that though this is not an explicit, quote, organized religion, it contains a master narrative, an account about the meaning of life, along with a recommendation for how to live based on that account of things. Right? So they have the same kind of thing that we have. We all do. He goes on. He's got an example here about Miss A and Miss B, and they're trying to. They're having a debate about whether they should take care of the poor, the hungry, the needy, and it's kind of bizarre. You should, if you haven't read it yet, take a look at it, because when you come into any kind of argument, you have to have some set of underlying beliefs, right? It just you can't just eliminate religion. We all have that underlying set of beliefs that helps us form our opinions about all kinds of things. Some really, really good stuff in there. All right. We're getting a little bit close to the end here, so I want to make sure we spend some time talking about this last section here, where he says that Christianity can save the world. And this gets back to what he touched on very briefly early on in this chapter, the idea that religion, that even Christians should be able to agree that religion is actually a source of evil and oppression. And I think what he means is that even Christians can mess this whole thing up if we approach Christianity in a way that is not actually true to the scriptures. If we believe that it's really about what we do and things that make us more holy and more pious, things that help us get God on our side, make God happy, and all those kinds of things, Then if we do those things, we look down on people that don't do those things, that aren't as successful at achieving those things as we are. That's religion, and that's not Christianity. And that's why he says Christianity can save the world, because Christianity is really about the fact that, hey, we are all awful. We are all just completely awful people. There is nothing we could ever do to make up for the awfulness that's within us, the sin that's within us, the brokenness that's within us, the evil that is within us, this tendency toward oppression, this tendency toward all kinds of other things, self-righteousness and hypocrisy. We are so bad that we actually can't do anything. And that's why Jesus came and did it all for us. And if Jesus came and did it all for us, and if what he said in the scriptures is true, and the way that he lived his life, even into death, as he faced death, the way he loved and cared for people that were his enemies, that had different viewpoints and different ways of looking at the world, different beliefs about what should happen in the present, he treated them with respect. He loved them to the end. He let them kill him, right? I mean, there was this sense that this nonviolence, this allowing the oppression to happen to him, but not dishing it out himself. I mean, that's got to be something that helps us in our conversations with people we disagree with. He says it this way on 19, within Christianity, robust Orthodox Christianity, there are rich resources that can make its followers agents for peace on earth. Christianity has within itself remarkable power to explain and expunge the divisive tendencies within the human heart. A little bit later down, further down, Christians believe that all human beings are made in the image of God, capable of goodness and wisdom. The biblical doctrine of the universal image of God, therefore, leads Christians to expect non-believers will be better than any of their mistaken beliefs could make them. The biblical doctrine of universal sinfulness also leads Christians to expect believers will be worse in practice than their orthodox beliefs should make them. So just because we have everything right doesn't mean we're going to be right all the time or be good all the time. And just because they may be wrong about certain ideas doesn't mean that they're always going to be bad or wrong in their behaviors. Christianity not only leads its members to believe people of other faiths have goodness and wisdom to offer, it also leads them to expect that many will live lives morally superior to their own. Wow, holy smokes. If your life depends on living a good life, well then yeah, but if your life is lived in grace and the mercy of God, well then you're not so worried about doing everything right. Some really insightful stuff here. In the very last couple of paragraphs, I just want to share with you, why should such an exclusive belief system lead to behavior that was so open to others? It was because Christians had within their belief system the strongest possible resource for practicing sacrificial service, generosity, and peacemaking. At the very heart of their view of reality was a man who died for his enemies, praying for their forgiveness. Reflection on this could only lead to a radically different way of dealing with those who are different from them. It meant they could not act in violence and oppression toward their opponents. We cannot skip lightly over the fact that there have been injustices done by the church in the name of Christ. Yet who can deny that the force of Christians' most fundamental beliefs can be a powerful impetus for peacemaking in our troubled world? You know, obviously Christians mess things up. Christians get things wrong. But within Christianity, there are some tremendous resources in there that basically help us go, we can look at that stuff and we can say, that's not Christian. That's not what it is to be a faithful Christian. And ultimately, again, resources to combat some of the bad stuff that's going on in the world and in these kinds of discussions. So not a reason to throw it all out, even with those exclusive claims that we will find in Christianity. So I got something in here, a comment. I missed a question last time, so I just want to take a look. We humans are awful and terrible sinners, but our religion leads us to live our lives and love others and create a life the way God intends it. Yeah. Hey, Roger's reading another book I've got going on right now. So thanks for including that, Roger. Yeah. That's why Christianity can save the world, because Christianity is not really a religion. It's not intended to be a tool for oppression. It's intended to be something that brings people together, and is the love and mercy of God shown to us in Jesus Christ. Ice cream is sweet, but Jesus is sweeter, right? So, hey, thank you for spending some time with me here this evening. And if you're watching this later as it gets recorded, I hope it's been helpful for you as well. Anybody that's got any questions, comments, looking to have further discussions on this book, I did not touch on everything. I'm trying to fly through. There's so much stuff, so many resources, so many wonderful thoughts in here, so many thoughts that really challenge us that I wasn't able to give as much time as I might have liked, really do justice to those. But if you have thoughts on that, send me an email, leave a comment here. After the video gets posted, you can leave comments there too. But I hope that a little bit more now tonight, you are able to join with me and say that ice cream is sweet, but Jesus is sweeter. And I hope for sure you can say that by the time we're done getting through the bulk of this book. Great to be with you. Thanks so much for joining me. Have a great night. God bless you. Bye-bye.